It's the ERP Confab. I'm David Essex, industry editor at Informa TechTarget's ERP website, with my colleague Brian McKenna, business applications editor at ComputerWeekly. So-called Agentic AI agents that can perform tasks autonomously, make decisions, and learn from experience, are the new leading edge in business applications. Vendors of enterprise software, including ERP, are racing to offer Agentic AI to their customers. This month, Brian got a first-hand view of the trend when he attended a Salesforce developer conference in San Francisco, followed by Oracle and NetSuite conferences in London. In the podcast, he reports on the biggest news from the conferences and shares his observations and takeaways. We also discuss Salesforce and Oracle's similar philosophies on Agentic AI, the important ways they differ, and how NetSuite is taking a more cautious approach for its customer base of small and medium-sized businesses. Brian, you've been to 3 conferences just this month, if I understand it, including one that involved traveling through a lot of time zones to the Salesforce TDX Developer Conference, and then you went to 2 in London, the Oracle Cloud World traveling show, so to speak, and also the NetSuite Suite World Conference in London. If you could give us a little bit of the highlights, let's start with the Salesforce conference.
Yeah, so March, which is almost finished,
Mhm.
was all about those 3 conferences for me in terms of some of my coverage at least. So I went to Salesforce's TDX conference in San Francisco, which I did. It was 5th, 6th of March, or as you would say, March 5th to
Mhm.
6th. So it's TDX, which I think stands for Trailblazer Developer Experience, or it could be Trailhead Developer Experience. I was asking around, and people didn't really seem to know why it was called TDX, but it is essentially a baby Dreamforce, and it's developers who are there. Interestingly, one thing that came up in a customer session was that for the first time, that one of the delegates could remember, because she stood up in front of some of the executive team and said, "Well, how come there's not a golden hoodie?" It's a big thing. These golden hoodies are very coveted among Salesforce trailblazers, but there was no award of a golden hoodie at the event, and people were quite irked by that. I think there was a general feeling, because this was a kind of customer gripe session, which maybe as journalists we shouldn't have been there. A sense that well, I didn't make too much of a big deal of the golden hoodie not being awarded, but I did mention it in my story,
I saw that.
one of my stories. A feeling that maybe they've gone a bit gung ho on artificial intelligence,
Mhm.
agent force, agentic AI, and are possibly neglecting the bread and butter of what it is most people who use Salesforce use Salesforce to do. So I thought that was kind of an interesting side thing. But they announced the release of Agent Force 2DX.
Mhm.
Initially, it was Agent Force 2.5, I think, and some
Mhm.
people who published ahead of the actual conference still had 2.5, so they had to change it to 2DX. Agent Force was released with tremendous fanfare at Dreamforce in September of last year, and a big ideological play by Mark Benioff and by Salesforce. A general kind of disparagement of co-pilots in favour of agents is the kind of gist of it, and against DIY AI. Benioff was saying, look, there's no value being created here. We're going to create the value through Agent Force, through our brand of Agentic AI. So the whole company really pivoted around Agent Force, almost to the extent that you could joke that they could change the name of the company from Salesforce to Agent Force. It was a big thing. It was a big thing for the marketing folks at Salesforce, because they had to kind of robotize all their mascots in terms of the imagery that they use for the mascots and things like that.
Mhm.
So Benioff really did a big, what we call in the UK, a handbrake turn. So a very, very sharp pivot towards agentic AI, and really away from co-piloting and do it yourself AI. And then in at the TDX event, there was just further development of that whole kind of that whole philosophy. So it's an autonomously agentic AI platform, and they announced a whole bunch of enhancements to it. They also announced the launch of a marketplace agent exchange to speed up kind of AI agent deployment.
Well, I read your Computer Weekly articles about this conference, and a couple of things occurred to me. One is a strong statement that one of the executives made. You had a separate article that was highlighting some of the statements by the executives. I think in
Yeah, yeah, I did more than one piece in a kind of outrageously productive act. And actually, there's more to come, David. More to come because I've got a customer story to write up.
they talked about it being a whole system, a trinity. In fact, at one point somebody said Holy Trinity.
Holy Trinity. I knew that would appeal to you as a
Yeah.
Catholic, good Catholic boy like myself. Yes.
Yes. So thank you for providing the context there. And trinity of applications, data, and agents.
Yeah.
The order is often different. Holy
Mm.
Spirit's in there somewhere, I think. And they said, they somewhat disparaged large language models, even though they said you do need a large language model. That's a
Yeah,
piece
they're
of.
using them. Yeah, they are
Yeah.
using them. Yeah.
Yeah, but then they said, companies basically all their, co-opetition vendors like SAP and maybe Oracle and a lot of the ERP vendors, that they're essentially just adding ChatGPT and copilots, and that they said no other company has what they have in terms of agents. So I guess what's my question there? I guess there is a question. Do you think that's valid? Is that how it seems? And you then talked to Oracle and went to an Oracle conference where they talked about a lot of the same stuff. Do you think that's a little bit of a hyperbole there for them to be claiming that, or did it seem real since you were at a conference that was showing all these agents?
Well, it's Salesforce, so you would expect some hyperbole. I mean, this is an amazing kind of marketing company.
Yeah.
I think they're onto something. I think that they were onto agentic AI quite early. I mean, the general narrative seems to be. I don't know if you'd agree with this or not, David. I guess it's fairly unexceptional to say from traditional AI, so predictive AI, machine learning based, the sort of stuff that we've been writing about for years.
Mhm.
And then along comes generative AI with ChatGPT and all the rest. But over the past sort of maybe 9 months or so, the shift has been towards agentic, meaning AIs that are increasingly, relatively autonomous, but increasingly autonomous. And they do like little jobs. They all do like little jobs, maybe jobs that you would ask an intern to do or something like that. It's like an army of interns, I'm sure. Somebody said to me, someone at Oracle said that to me actually, and yeah. So I mean that, and they were quite early into that. I think that would be fair to say, and certainly Benioff was in very combative mood at Dreamforce about this, about the value of embedding AI into kind of little business processes within different functions. I suppose their limitation might be that they are Salesforce, so they're focused on sales automation and customer experience. And as we both know, there's a lot more to business applications
Mhm.
than that. You've also got supply chain management, ERP, human capital management,
Yeah.
and so on and so forth, which is where Oracle then, they can play and the SAP can play a bit more convincingly than can Salesforce. But I think the gambit that Benioff made about the shift to agentic, they deserve credit for that, in my view. It's also interesting. I mean, David Schmeier, the president and chief product officer, in an interview, he was kind of also drawing in what else Salesforce has in terms of Slack and Tableau, the whole stack of mostly acquired technologies that they have, and then the fundamental kind of role of data cloud as central to to what they are trying to achieve. I mean, their analogy for this, and they used this in the keynote, and Schmeier used it in the interview, was, you couldn't have a computer without a microprocessor. You need other stuff, right? You need storage, you need RAM and a display and an operating system and so on and so forth. So a large language model, by that analogy, is like the microprocessor. So you need stuff around it, and they say they have that stuff that goes around it. Um, I I did think, I must say though, I was very impressed by, well, all their executives are impressive, but Paula Goldman was really clear about this. Their chief ethical and humane use officer, the lady has a very interesting background, I think. PhD from one of the Ivy League universities, not in a kind of computer science thing, but in something else. But anyway, so I mean, she said, like, I think a lot of the public discourse about AI has been about LLMs, but if you think about Agentforce, it's a whole system. Um, we've got so used to talking about AI as models over the past few years, but really, I think we need to be talking about systems. Um, I mean, that's essentially what you said earlier, David. But that was pretty clear. I thought. I think she put that pretty clearly.
Well, speaking of people, as a man of the people, as I know you are also, for people who defend the worker, there are certain things about AI that don't always sound so great. For example, the phrase digital labor platform that was used at that conference. Is Salesforce maybe one of the app vendors that's leading the charge in eliminating jobs, do you think? Or is that unfair?
I think that's probably unfair at this stage. I mean, as you know, it's ubiquitously across the industry. People say, well, old jobs will diminish, but new jobs will be created, and it's very much about Salesforce's rhetoric. Is it's about the human agent and the virtual agent working together hand in hand, and so on. But yeah, I mean, it's the elephant in the room, isn't it? The human labor
I think
question.
so. I want to share another quote from your article. You quoted Adam Evans, Executive Vice President and General Manager of the AI platform there. And he said, companies today have more work than workers, and
Yeah.
Agentforce is stepping in to fill the gap. By extending digital labor beyond CRM, we're making it easier than ever for business to embed agentic AI into any workflow or application to handle routine tasks, augment employees, and connect with customers. But that bit about they have more work than workers, in the olden days, let's say 2, 3 years ago, if they had more work than workers, a company would often, if they could afford to, would hire more workers. I'm talking about people here. You know what I
Mm.
mean? So that statement, maybe I'm being a little paranoid here, but that statement, it looks great, but it still seems like in what is essentially a white collar profession, I think you would call it, is contact center and certain aspects of sales, but especially the
Mm.
customer service aspect.
Yeah.
It's really easy to see how, yeah, it's augmenting. I can see that it's augmenting, but it just seems like the agents, as they get better, jobs probably won't be refilled, that, vacancies won't be filled. Anyway, I don't want to go too far down this path, but maybe you have further thoughts about that.
I see what you're saying, David. You're right. It is the elephant in the room, isn't it? But at the
Mhm.
main keynote at TDX, so this wasn't, Benioff, who wouldn't, be the keynote at that event. It was Patrick Stokes, who's EVP of Product and Industries Marketing. He drew attention almost in an aside to a kind of a global labour shortage driven by a sort of slowdown in world population growth. And I've heard that point being made. I heard that point being made by a McKinsey consultant actually, apropos Davos. So a conversation at Davos. So I think that's an interesting point. That maybe if you look at the really big picture, if there is a slowdown in, not a decline in population, but a slowdown in the rate of growth of population, and in countries like our own, maybe this is more true of the UK than it is of the US, but people are
Mhm.
having fewer children.
Mm. I think that's still happening. Yeah, it's been happening here too. Yeah. Mhm.
Japan is another country that famously is a bit like that. I mean, we're not going to resolve this here, are we?
No, we're not. And I don't want to sound like a Luddite or anything. I mean, I think ultimately
I'm
this
a big
again.
fan of the Luddites, I have to say.
You probably have a few books about that.
Unfairly traduced.
Yeah. So, and I understand progress, and a lot of it comes down to, okay, are you really going to train them? Because the line is always to do more high value jobs that only
It's
people
always
can.
that, isn't it? More strategic
Yeah.
stuff. Liberates them to do. Yeah.
Yeah. Liberates them to sit at home and be unemployed. Anyway, okay, I'll take, maybe it's just about time to move on. I just want to ask one more question. That was the biggest conference, I think, of the three, and we've got some more to get to. But you usually go to user conferences, as do I. This was a developer conference. Any observations about the vibe or the people who attended? I mean, I assume it's a more techie crowd, but then on the other hand, programming is getting to be, in some ways, less the domain of the sort of the high P.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah, it's interesting. You should observe that. I mean, there were CIOs there and there were CEOs there, and but mostly it is a developer crowd, which is why they were quite irked about the lack of a golden hoodie.
Mhm.
So yeah, definitely it did have a little bit of a different vibe. You'll find huge enthusiasm. I mean, David Schmeier was saying this because he'd been at Davos with Mark Benioff. And yeah, he said, look, all these CEOs are super interested in AI.
Hmm.
It's almost all they want to talk about. Yeah, he said something like Benioff said in his presentation to a group of CEOs at Davos, congratulations, you're the last generation that will only be managing humans, because future CEOs will be managing humans, but also virtual agents. So I see what you're saying, and it's definitely a more techie crowd. It's a bit more chilled and sedate than Dreamforce
Mhm.
as well. It's quite a nice conference, quite a short conference.
Oh, good.
Yep.
Yeah, good to know. Speaking of companies that have been embedding AI in workflows now for years, which we've both covered for years,
Yeah.
is Oracle. And you went to I think it's called the Oracle Cloud World Tour, London.
Yeah.
And AI agents, again, played a pretty prominent role in the announcements. And
Absolutely. Yeah.
with Miranda, you actually had a sit down or some kind of conversation one on one with Steve Miranda, I think, before the conference. So,
Yes, I
what are some of
did.
the highlights from that?
Yeah, so I had a pre-conference briefing with Steve Miranda, who's executive vice president of Oracle Applications Development. So he's the kind of top person, I suppose, for Fusion, for Oracle's Fusion applications suite. And what I would say about that conversation, which was very insightful as ever, is he laid out that kind of narrative for me of how Oracle has obviously been doing AI and machine learning for many years, and then it got into generative AI with 50 use cases and then 50 agents subsequent to that, and now the new thing, and this is step by step, quarter by quarter. They've got a big roadmap to roll out in the quarters to come. Is Agent Studio, which is, I guess the gist of that is about orchestrating the agents. It's managing teams of agents, and across the whole kind of business application stack. So ERP, SEM, HCM, and customer experience, and all the rest of it. And it's all, their argument would be it's all rooted on the Oracle Cloud Infrastructure. So, you get the whole package with Oracle, and they're using all, the LLMs. That mention an LLM, they'll be using it. Um, but yeah, I mean, so that's kind of their approach, and they're taking a very, as we would both expect from Oracle, very pragmatic, step by step, proving out the value. A lot of HCM use cases being mentioned around Oracle, whether it's doing a job description or orchestrating the process of onboarding someone, from advertising and interviewing and making an offer, and you maybe have to go and do a background check so you can use another application that's integrated into the agent. It's all these little steps in business processes, improving business processes. That's the kind of the thing that they're focusing on with Agent Studio. Previously, they're focusing more on the kind of generative AI use cases of like summarization and text-based stuff, but now they've got to that stage of Agent Studio, which is kind of similar to the Salesforce approach, maybe with a broader range of business applications, but it's not saying this is a revolution or you have to do lots of DIYing yourself. They're building it all in for their customers.
Yeah.
I thought, by the way, Steve Moran, this might interest you, David. I thought Steve I had a great quote from him where he said, look, the whole reason why we build applications is to help customers to automate business. What they do in their businesses. He says, none of our customers are in business to do their accounting.
Right.
Or to orchestrate their email marketing, or that's not what people are in business for. They're making stuff and they want to make it better and they want to sell it better, and so on and so forth. And he just kept saying that this is a step function in automation. I think he's a mathematician by background, Steve, so that's the sort of language he uses.
I wouldn't be surprised. You mentioned earlier the human capital management or HR aspect and onboarding. That is such a rich area, and I covered that in some depth over the years, mostly for our HR software site, and it is a multi-step process. It involves, certainly going out to the internet, getting emails from applicants, parsing their resumes and their cover letters and trying to sort them, which has been going on for a few years now. But then there are a lot of steps, and it is labor intensive. Often there would need to be a person scheduling the first interview, and then there is so much more. Onboarding itself is a whole subject, and you've got to get the key cards going. It connects with IT, so it is not only is it a really good example of how agents can work in workflows, but it's one of the big areas.
And doing it because this is Oracle, right? So their customers are big. I mean, doing these things at scale is mind-boggling.
Yeah.
You're not just employing a few people. You might have tens of thousands of employees, right? Globally.
And then if you can really keep they call it the employee life cycle, if you can integrate, as I know Oracle is already trying to do, and I think they've partially done it, just even after onboarding, we know about learning, it's tied into succession planning and career planning and retention, trying to make sure you don't lose sight of somebody's career goals and giving them the training. And so there is a lot of automation potential in the later stages of that life cycle too.
So that was basically Oracle Cloud World, the London edition. And then a few days after that, I was at another Oracle event, effectively, Suite Connect. Another good interview. Also, the location. It was at the QE2 Centre, which is quite a nice location in London because it's opposite the Houses of Parliament. And Evan Goldberg, who's founder. An EVP of NetSuite. He was joking, shall we do like the President Analyst session? Shall we do it in the style of the House of Commons, the honourable member for this, that, or the other? It was again a fair amount of AI going on there. They didn't really have anything like Agent Studio to offer yet. Maybe that will be in their future. They initially were doing a thing that they call text enhance. So again, it's this kind of automatic, generative AI use cases. They've bedded those in across the NetSuite, suite, as it were. And now they are kind of, it's more heading towards agentic more autonomous activity, and so on. Interestingly, he's not wild about the term agent. I mean, he accepts it's the industry term, it's what everyone's using. But he said, this is just his opinion, but I think he's probably right, is that appeals more to the technical side of IT.
Sounds cool. We're programming agents, and this is like a
Yeah.
big robot. Yeah.
Yeah, what does that even mean to the average person? I mean, it's like it could
Yeah.
be a travel agent, or it could be a spy, or
Yeah.
the term he used. I know this is a very American term. It's a bit inside baseball
Hmm.
as a term, and he's focused more on the end result. He said he prefers the terms advice and assistance because that's what these agents are. In terms of the value they're delivering, that's what they're delivering. But just parking generative AI, etc., for just for a second. So they also launched in the UK something they've already launched, like in the US, and our colleague Jim O'Donnell's written about this. Anything as a service,
Hmm.
which is XaaS or XaaS or
Hmm.
XaaS. But what this is about is hybrid companies. So the thesis is there's a new category of company who do maybe products but with services, or services that become productized. So there's a kind of hybrid thing going on with a whole new breed of, especially new companies, entrepreneurial companies. You know, you can't categorize them as just either products or services. There's always a kind of fusion going on, and therefore you need revenue recognition and accounting measures and things like that to kind of, deal with maybe a move from selling a product to selling a subscription, and so on and so forth. And they call this, I mean, there is a kind of term for it, which I wrote down, but you know, anything as a service, XaaS. But I thought that was interesting, and I did wonder. I didn't really get an answer to this because it's probably unanswerable whether the UK is a rich field for the development of hybrid companies. You know, because we major so much on services, especially financial services, rather
Yeah.
than making stuff.
I was just
Um,
thinking, yeah, I think he's onto something as usual. I mean, he's the guy from what I could tell in my research was started the very first SaaS ERP company, really. No
yeah,
one seems to dispute that in, I think, 1999. But it's funny that it's everything as a service, and I'll try never to pronounce it as excess.
it's a hard one to pronounce. It's actually called NetSuite Suite Success XaaS edition. Yeah, it's really snappy, isn't it?
So right,
Um,
so it is snappy, but not too many years ago we were kind of amazed by the thought of product as a service. You know, GE, I think it was GE Aviation,
yeah,
selling
yeah,
a certain amount of jet engine lifetime, and selling the output of the jet engine rather than the jet engine itself, and then all sorts of other
yeah,
things. And now it's
yeah,
like we're saying service as a service, which seems kind of redundant, but that's probably what he means by everything, right? Products, services, and there's probably a few things
yeah.
I'm leaving out there.
Well, the example though that he gave, which I thought was quite compelling, is Apple. He says Apple is the ultimate kind of hybrid company because it's, products and services, right?
Yeah, I can see that. What you said, I feel a little bit vindicated in my fairly quick analysis of what might have been a little different about what happened at Suite Connect compared to the other two conferences, even though, NetSuite has been an Oracle company for quite a few years now. Everything you said at the beginning of your summary confirms what I just superficially picked up from reading the two press releases from NetSuite, where they weren't playing up agents, and they really seem to be talking more about ChatGPT workflows, automated workflows. They weren't hyping the concept of agentic AI the way the other two companies have been.
I think I mean, that might be slightly overstating it, but I mean, we have to remember that. So, what is NetSuite? I mean, it's focused more on SMEs and mid market, and it's very much, it's finance professionals,
Mhm.
right? Who
Yeah.
are a notoriously conservative bunch. You know, you can't overexcite them. Um, So that there is. I mean, they know their audience, right? I mean, they know that they're talking to business owners and financial directors or CFOs of small or medium-sized enterprises, etc., etc. And you can't really pull the wool over the eyes of those people. But yeah, I mean, it's this point about advice and assistance, and that's kind of being, it's spread through their suite of products, the NetSuite. Interesting that you should say about their pioneering role, because they are, in a way, they are like a sibling to Salesforce, aren't they? That's
Oh, yeah.
maybe one
And
way
they
to
were
kind of
both
think about
working
them.
for Larry Ellison, both Mark Benioff and Goldberg. I think they were working for Oracle, or maybe I think
Yeah,
actually Goldberg might have been separate, and then he knew Larry Ellison. And I did interview about this a few years ago, but I've forgotten the details. That a lot of his motivation for going ahead and forming NetSuite was from a conversation with
definitely.
Larry Ellison,
Yeah,
and yeah, and then Benioff worked at Oracle and then went off as his own, and was also very influenced by Larry Ellison, which I always found ironic because for many years, Larry Ellison was not the biggest champion of cloud computing. If you remember, I think even
no.
when you and I first were covering him, he wasn't, and then that's no longer true as of the last roughly decade now. But
Yeah, I mean,
yeah.
we're old enough to remember that. But yeah, I suppose the
Mhm.
apple doesn't fall far from the tree, does it?
No, it doesn't.
Uh,
I came into this or was preparing for this thinking I'd like to have a theme. And then I read your articles, and it's pretty clear that the big theme, especially in the case of Salesforce and Oracle, is agentic AI. And this thing that the ERP vendors have been talking about for a while now of embedding ChatGPT and some of the, let's say, older machine learning
yeah,
technology
yeah,
into different parts of ERP. ServiceNow is doing this, suppressing to some degree the so-called back office elements, making them less prominent, and having it all be about the task that the user needs to see, rather than having to get too much into the tedium of entering data and doing all sorts of remembering to go to this module versus that module. It does seem like this is, even in the case of all three vendors, but especially in the case of Oracle and
yeah,
Salesforce, it's a more push in that direction.
yeah. There's definitely a narrative to this from older school artificial intelligence, machine learning, prediction through generative AI to now more kind of agentic.
Mhm.
But interestingly, just to kind of as a little addendum to our conversation, so I was chatting this morning to Connor Reardon, who's chair of the UK and Ireland SAP user group, just to bring SAP into the conversation finally. And that conversation was really around their business data clouds and their tie up with Databricks, kind of getting all the data a company would need, both inside and outside, so that you can do kind of AI augmented analysis on top of that. And of course, there are agents, right? I mean, Joel, I think, I mean, you know this much better than I do, David. I've not been so close to SAP over the past year and a half or so, but they've got Joule, haven't they? Which has kind of agentic elements to it as well.
Yeah.
But anyway, I mean, the point of that ramble was to say, well, Connor was saying, well, where are the use cases? Where are the actual use cases for this stuff? Not the theoretical use cases, but the actual customer up on stage saying, we've done it all, man. We've done predictive, we've done generative, we've done agentic, and we're getting a ton of business benefit out of it.
Yeah.
Um, and as one sort of data point he made to me was they did a survey last year which confirmed that something like 70% of SAP customers think AI is overhyped.
I can't say I blame them. It is still very prospective. It's not as prospective as, let's say, quantum computing, which I happen to be editing a package on right now. It's obviously more real than that, and it's being used, and especially the centric stuff that we've talked about, the Chat GPT, that was the initial use, but now we have these agents, and there's some real things going on.
There is, and I did ask my first opening question for Evan Goldberg and also Nikki Tozer from EMEA, General Manager for EMEA. Apologies to Nikki if I've got the job title not quite right there. Was, where are we in the evolution? And they both said early days. It's still early days, but there's tremendous potential. Even if you don't call it agentic, like I said, Evan wasn't a massive fan of the word agent. The drift is clear towards having autonomous AI doing business process improvement stuff.
There's going to be a lot to come, and I tend to be a skeptic about a lot of things, but it's pretty clear a lot of this is real and building steam, and a lot of smart people are working on it. And I think that's a reason why we have to stick around for a bit longer to be around and covering this evolution, because I do think there's a future, an interesting future to be writing about and observing. So
Yeah.
yeah, Brian, as always, I appreciate our talk and thank you for coming on the podcast today.
Oh, my pleasure.